Hey everyone, I'm out here in the garage with the Acura RL behind me, and what we're going to be talking about today is odometer backlight repair. So stay tuned. So if you're new to the channel, just want to welcome you here, and hopefully you'll consider subscribing if you like what you see. Also, check out Car Apprentice on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I post lots of pictures and videos on those platforms before I post anything on YouTube. And occasionally I'll post things on those platforms I don't post on YouTube. Also, check out the website at carapprentice.com. And don't forget to hit the like button if you like this video. So the infamous odometer issue with this cluster. What happens is this backlight down here for the odometer goes out. And so what most people will do, they'll go and they'll buy another one of these clusters or buy one used, or they'll have it repaired. So I actually ran into this issue myself recently, and fortunately I have a little bit of background in electronics repair because I used to repair plasma and LCD TVs as a hobby about 10 years ago. So I probably repaired up to about 3 or 4 dozen TVs. Alright, so I want to throw a disclaimer out there right away. This is not an electronics repair video. This channel is not an electronics repair channel. I'm just going to kind of walk you through at a layman's level some of the things that I did to figure out what the issue is with this cluster. So if you don't have an electronics repair background or you don't know how to use a soldering iron, I would definitely recommend getting a professional involved. Maybe if you have a friend that has some experience with that kind of thing, because you can easily ruin these boards in here if you're not careful with a lot of heat. You can damage the all sorts of components. You can damage the rings on the board. So definitely, if you don't have experience with this, get a professional involved or somebody who has some sort of experience with the soldering iron. So let's get into it. All right, so my cluster's odometer backlight issue is intermittent, and I suspect that is caused by heat. So here's my cluster with a working odometer backlight. I traced the failure from the odometer's connector to a small board under this metal cover at the rear. So I'm introducing a little heat with a heat gun on a low setting to see if the backlight will now stop working. You can also do the reverse and use cold spray in an attempt to revive the backlight and pinpoint where the failure lies. As you can see, the backlight is now not working, so we'll get to work on a fix. We're going to start with the cluster on the bench, so if you don't know how to remove the cluster, I'll link to the video that I made on replacing dash lights in the RL. Now I'm going to take a bit of a detour and disassemble the whole cluster. This level of disassembly is not needed to complete the repair, but I figured I'd just go ahead and take the whole cluster apart in this video, just in case you want to perform other work such as bulb or gauge replacement. Also, admittedly, the steps are a little out of order. I have a large flathead screwdriver with some tape wrapped around the blade, and I'm going to carefully go around the cluster and push the front cover's tabs through just enough to release them. What I'm demonstrating is to hold the screwdriver closer to the blade for better control instead of holding it by the handle. I would also double or even triple check each tab. I then place the screwdriver's blade between the cover and the cluster body, then lightly twist the screwdriver to separate the front cover and pull it off. Next, we'll remove the bezel from the cluster using the same process of carefully pushing on the tabs with the screwdriver. Alright, we're going to remove the back cover by unscrewing the 3 screws at the top of the cluster first, then snap the tabs loose. I'm going to disconnect the odometer board from the main board at the rear and remove the 2 screws in the front to take it out, but it's better to remove the screws that hold the speedometer in place and take it out first. As you can see, I had to lift up on the bottom edge of the speedometer to get the odometer board out. Looking at the odometer board, it appears to be fairly resilient and is most likely not the source of any backlight issues. We're going to remove the screws at the rear that hold the circuit boards and the gauges in place with the number 2 Phillips screwdriver. It's extremely important to put the screws back into the holes from which they came, so we'll punch them through a piece of paper to keep them in order. Also, I should have been wearing gloves so that fingerprints aren't left on the faces of the gauges. Next, we'll remove the harness connector on the left and the ribbon cable. Here's the same board we're after from another cluster that I have. We need to remove the solder for the metal box and the board's 5 posts. There are various tools available for removing solder from the board, and the one I'm going to use today is the Acura 808 desoldering gun. Now, one issue I have with removing the small board from the main board is that the small board's pins are actually soldered onto it, so solder appears to clog the holes on the main board and is tough to fully remove. One method I use is to repeatedly remove and apply solder until the pins are loose. Alright, so with this board removed, I don't see any charred components. I did notice that the large resistor on this board from my second cluster had broken solder joints. So I would scan it with the magnifying glass to identify any broken joints, then resolder them. I don't believe any of these components on this board actually fail, but if you do run across a situation where after you do all this work, it's still not working, you could have a component that has failed. Besides the issues I just mentioned, I believe the main culprit of the issues with this cluster's odometer backlight is the solder joints for the pins. As you can see here, there are cracks on at least a couple of these pins. What happens when they get warm, the joints expand, causing a loss of contact. I'm going to reflow, or basically reheat, the solder on the boards to reestablish the proper connection. You may choose to replace the solder, but I really didn't think it was necessary. To hold each pin straight and taut while I reflow the solder, I'm using a pair of needle nose pliers. Now that the reflow is complete, I'm test fitting the board on the main board, and it fits nicely. To put this all back together, I put the small board in the metal box and close it up. Then I align the pins on the main board. I soldered the metal box's tabs back into place first, then I soldered the small board's pins. Okay, so we'll reassemble everything now. First, I'll install the odometer board on the front of the housing, routing the connector through to the back side. Next, I mount the main board, then install the speedometer. Remember to reinstall the screws back in their exact holes. Also, again, I should have been wearing gloves to prevent fingerprints from being left on the gauges. I'll then reinstall the other two gauges. On the back, the two harness connectors are snapped in place, followed by the ribbon cable. To finish up the rear, the cover gets installed, securing it with the 3 screws. You could try hitting the small board under the metal cover with a little heat again to confirm the fix. The bezel and front cover get installed next, snapping them into place, and we're done. Alright, so I've got the cluster back in the car, and it's working again. Perfect. Alright, so there you have it. There are some tips on the instrument cluster odometer backlight repair. So hopefully this information was helpful, and thanks for watching.